Today I want to dive into what many called the most dangerous amusement park in American history. A park that wasn't built for safety, or even sanity. A place where the rides were experimental. The staff were often teenagers, and the rules were treated more like suggestions. This is the story of Action Park. How it began, what happened inside, and how it kept operating through years of injuries, lawsuits, and tragedies. Action Park officially opened in 1978 in Vernon, New Jersey, but its origins began a couple of years earlier. In 1976, Eugene Mulvihill and his company, Great American Recreation, which owned the Vernon Valley ski area, wanted a way to make money during the summer months. Following the lead of other ski resorts, they built a 2,700-foot alpine slide down one of the ski trails. And if you don't know what an alpine slide is, it's a gravity-driven amusement ride where a rider travels down a track on a specialized cart, controlling their own speed with the handbrake. By the summer of 1978, Mulvihill had added 2 water slides and a go-kart track, creating a collection of rides called the Vernon Valley Summer Park. On July 4, 1978, this park officially opened to the public, the beginning of what would later be known as Action Park. The park's creator, Gene Mulvihill, wasn't a theme park engineer. He was a businessman, one who believed deeply in the idea of freedom, especially the freedom to take risk. Mulvihill's philosophy was simple. People shouldn't be coddled. They should be allowed to push themselves, and he wanted Action Park to be a place where guests controlled their own experience. That meant rides that relied on your own balance, vehicles that you steered, and slides that didn't slow you down. In other words, if something went wrong, it was on you. The result was a park full of attractions that looked fun on the surface, but underneath were unpredictable, experimental, and awfully poorly tested. People who visited Action Park during the 1980s describe a place that felt wild. Not in the modern amusement park way where everything is polished and controlled, but wild in the sense that it felt unregulated, unsupervised, and sometimes unsafe. Teenagers ran most of the rides, many were undertrained, some drank on the job, and lifeguards would later go on to say that the wave pool was so dangerous that they would pull out dozens of people a day. The motorized rides, go-karts, speedboats, and even tanks were often pushed far beyond their intended limits. It would seem everywhere you looked, people walked around with bandages, scrapes, or sunburned skin missing, especially those after riding the alpine slide. We'll get into that in a little bit, but visitors joked that getting injured was part of the experience. Employees said it was unusual for the park to apparently treat hundreds of cuts and burns in a single day. The atmosphere was chaotic, reckless, and strange. Action Park felt like a place that shouldn't have existed, and yet somehow did. Now on to some of the rides. Out of every ride at Action Park, none represents the park's mindset better than the Cannonball Loop. The idea was simple: a straight enclosed water slide that ended with a full vertical loop. Engineers warned that this design wasn't safe, that a human body wasn't meant to go through a loop like that, using only water and gravity. But Action Park tested it anyway. Former employees say that Gene Mulvihill offered teenagers $100 to try it first. Some riders shot out with bloody noses. Others came out disoriented, bruised, or even with missing teeth, and some riders didn't come out at all. They got stuck in the loop, wedged in the curve section where momentum died. Dav had to install a small hatch on the other side of the loop so employees could reach in and pull people out. Eventually, the state shut down the slide, calling it unsafe. But in the very, very short time that it operated, the Cannonball Loop became a symbol of Action Park, something that looked like fun until you actually experienced it. The ride with the most injuries at Action Park wasn't a water slide or roller coaster. It was an alpine slide, a concrete track that ran down a mountainside. Riders sat on a small plastic sled with the handbrake that was supposed to control speed, but the brake didn't always work. Sometimes it jammed, sometimes it overreacted, and sometimes riders were going too fast for it to matter. Falls were constant. If you slipped off the sled, your body met the concrete directly, and the concrete was rough. It tore skin instantly. Former employees said you could look at people leaving the ride and immediately know who wiped out. Their arms and legs were scraped raw, sometimes missing layers of skin. The injuries were so common that the park kept bottles of iodine at the bottom of the track, and visitors said the smell carried across the area. One of the most feared attractions at Action Park wasn't a ride at all. It was the wave pool, a large artificial pool capable of generating strong waves. On paper, it sounded harmless, but in reality, the waves were powerful. The water was murky, and the pool was often overcrowded with hundreds of people at once. Lifeguards reported performing dozens of rescues per shift, an incredibly high number for any water park. Visitors named it the grave pool. Between exhaustion, between tiring out, panic, and collisions, multiple drownings occurred here, including teenagers who slipped under without being noticed in the chaos. These deaths were documented, tragic reminders of how quickly fun turned into danger inside Action Park. Tarzan swing looks simple. Hold onto a rope, swing over water, and drop in. The problem wasn't the swing itself, it was the water. The pool fed from a natural spring, and the temperatures could be shockingly cold, even on hot days. Some people jumped in and immediately experienced cold water shock, gasping involuntarily as they hit the surface. Lifeguards reported people freezing mid-drop, losing their grip early, or panicking as soon as they touched the water. If Waterworld was dangerous, Motorworld was something else entirely. This section of the park focused on motorized attractions, speedboats, go-karts, and even tank-like vehicles that shot tennis balls. On the go-karts, employees discovered that there's a simple trick. Wedging a tennis ball in the governor made the carts run faster than designed. Some guests hit speeds close to 50 miles per hour. Crashes were common, collisions constant, and protective gear minimal. In the speedboats, people regularly rode under the influence, ignoring the rules and smashing into the other boats or the docks. Staff admitted that the lake water was so filled with fuel and oil that falling in carried its own risk. Motorworld was unpredictable, fast and often dangerous, a perfect reflection of Action Park itself. As Action Park grew, so did its reputation, and not in the way any park wants. By the early 1980s, local hospitals saw so many injuries from the park that it became routine. Burns from the alpine slide, broken bones from collisions, near drownings from the wave pool, but some incidents went far beyond injury. These are the 6 publicly documented deaths associated with Action Park. July 8, 1980. 19-year-old George Larson Jr. was riding the alpine slide when his cart left the track and his head struck a rock. He was taken to the hospital but died 8 days later, on July 16. In the aftermath, Gene Mulvihill told reporters that Larson had been an employee because a customer death would have required immediate reporting to the state authorities. While Larson had worked at the ski resort that previous winter, he was not an employee at Action Park. A few years later, on July 24, 1982, George Lopez, a 15-year-old boy, would unfortunately drown in the tidal wave pool, marking the second death of Action Park. And in 1987, Gregory Grandchamps, an 18-year-old, would also drown in the tidal wave pool. This would be the second drowning in that attraction. August 1, 1982. Jeffrey Nathan, a 27-year-old man from Fair Lawn, New Jersey, was thrown from his kayak on the kayak experience after it tipped. When he stepped into the water to balance the boat, he made contact with the metal grate that was electrified by exposed wiring connected to the underwater fan system. He went into cardiac arrest from the electric shock, and 2 nearby relatives were also injured. Nathan was rushed to the hospital in Warwick, New York, where he later died. The park initially denied that the electrocution caused his death, arguing that there were no burns. The coroner responded that the water-based electrocutions typically don't leave burns. The ride was drained for investigation. Accounts varied. The park claimed that the wiring damage was just a nick, while others said that the exposed area was close to 8 inches. The state ultimately found no safety law violations, but they did detect a 19-amp current in a grounding circuit days later, enough to cause an injury under certain conditions. The ride would never reopen again. In 1984, a visitor suffered a fatal heart attack after plunging into the Tarzan swing pool, where the water temperature was between 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, far colder than the park's other pools, which stayed in the 70 to 80 Fahrenheit range. The sudden shock of the cold water was believed to have triggered the cardiac arrest. August 27, 1984. Donald DePass, a 20-year-old man from Brooklyn, drowned in the cliff dive pool. According to Gene Mulvihill's son, lifeguards struggled to find him in the murky, deep water, and even Andy Mulvihill himself entered the pool to help search. After the incident, the bottom of the pool was painted white to improve underwater visibility. 6 lives lost, hundreds of injuries every season, and still the park remained open. Action Park wasn't just dangerous, It was becoming a place where tragedy no longer seemed to surprise anybody. The lawsuits began piling up. Families who were injured or who have lost somebody into the legal system. But Gene Mulvihill didn't operate like most park owners. He fought hard. He resisted settlements. Cases dragged on, and victims often faced long, draining legal battles. Many former employees and attorneys described the process as frustrating and exhausting. The park's strategy wasn't to resolve issues. It was to outlast anyone who challenged it. For years, this approach worked, but eventually, the number of cases, injuries, and rising costs started to catch up. By the late 1980s, major insurance companies no longer wanted anything to do with Action Park. The injury rate was too high and the liability was too great. So Mulvihill took an unusual path. He created his own insurance company. It was called the London and Overseas Insurance Company, based out of the Cayman Islands. And though it appeared independent, it was controlled by Mulvihill himself. This allowed Action Park to claim it was insured, when in practice, it was closer to being self-insured. New Jersey regulators eventually noticed problems with the company's structure and began scrutinizing the park more intensely. It didn't shut Action Park down immediately, but it added pressure that the park was no longer able to ignore. Mulvihill often clashed with state authorities. He challenged citations, he appealed safety violations, he slowed down compliant processes, he reopened rides after making the bare minimum adjustments required. Former inspectors described the park as difficult to regulate, and former employees recalled a culture that viewed rules as obstacles, not guidelines. Action Park didn't break every rule, it simply resisted them, pushed them, and found every gray area possible. For years, this allowed it to operate in a space where thrill overweighed oversight. But eventually, that approach became unsustainable. By the mid-1990s, the perfect storm hit. Mountains of lawsuits, insurance problems, growing debt, increased state scrutiny, and attendance that continued to fall. Financially, the park could no longer survive. In 1996, Action Park closed. Though under new ownership, parts of the property would later reopen as Mountain Creek, this time operated under modern safety regulations and industry standards. But the original Action Park, the reckless, notorious, and famous version, was gone. And yet, its story didn't fade. For some people, Action Park is a nostalgic memory. And for others, it's a reminder of pain, lawsuits, and tragedy. A place where people were hurt. A place where loved ones didn't come home. The legacy is complicated. It's part urban legend, part cautionary tale, and part symbol of an era before safety became a priority and required. Action Park wasn't just a dangerous amusement park. It was a rare moment in history. A place built on the idea that limits didn't matter, consequences were optional, and thrill was worth the risk. But the truth is simple. When danger becomes the attraction, it eventually becomes the cost. And at Action Park, the cost was far too high.